Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and today I'm beginning my third week of Victober, and I'm hoping it's more successful than week 2, in which I didn't finish a single book. I DNF'd one, and we won't talk about that anymore. It's Tuesday, and I have begun, but not got far into, a buddy read of Armadale by Wilkie Collins. On the back it says, one of the most hardened female villains whose devices and desires have ever blackened fiction. I'm looking forward to this one. I've had a hit and miss relationship with Wilkie Collins. I didn't much get on with The Haunted Hotel. I liked The Law and the Lady, which was a recommendation from Kate Howe. I didn't much care for The Woman in White, but really enjoyed The Moonstone. And so I'm hoping that Armadale is going to be one that I enjoy. And the only thing that puts me off this book is how small the font is. This week I would also like to read more of The Picture of Dorian Gray, simply because it's short and I feel like I could get it out of the way rather quickly. However, reading the first chapter, I'm finding that it's a bit full on in terms of words. Oscar Wilde is very intent on eking the meaning out of every sentence. There's a little bit of brevity going on, but at the same time, there's a lot of wit and a lot of double meaning, it seems, within the words and what's gone on in just one chapter. And I'm going to be continuing to listen to Great Expectations by Dickens, which is also a buddy read, kind of, with Charlie of Charlie Brooke. Only we're both going at our own pace. We're both listening to different versions of the audiobook. I'm very much enjoying the Martin Jarvis narration, but because I've read it before, I'm not really hugely caring about trying to get this one finished by a certain amount of time. I have been doing some modern reading alongside that, but I will be discussing those books elsewhere rather than in a Victober video. So yesterday I walked Sally twice. We were looking after my nephew as well for part of the day because he's down because it's half term in Scotland. And today, reading, just edited and uploaded the book video that I did last night, and I really need to knuckle down and edit last week's video too. You know, it never rains, but it pours. I've had to get changed because I was doing the washing up and got absolutely soaked when I dropped a mug into the sink, and so now I'm in something that, well, I only wear the clothes from 7 stones ago as pyjamas. But I finished book the first of Armadale by Wilkie Collins, and blooming heck, that was intrigue, mystery. There was a yacht chase, a near-duel, cowardice, murder. All within the first 50 pages, so I can only imagine what the next 550 are going to be like. Oh. $650. I didn't realise this book was so long. I'm shocked. I'm shocked by what was included in those first 50 pages, honestly. I haven't yet met the people who were discussed on the back. I don't know where things are going to go, but it does mention Alan Armadale, and I'm guessing that, well, it could be the second. There are a lot of Alan Armadales now, and this book so far has definitely inspired a lot of soap operas, and that's what I'll say about that. Indeed, there's an aspect of this book already that, whilst I haven't read it, the ideas behind it, there's something similar that's going to happen in the second cozy crime novel, and I find that coincidence quite humorous. Obviously, I can't tell you what that is, but yeah, shocked. I had to come here just to tell you how shocked I am. But we're going to go on reading and we're going to find out who Lydia Gwilt is and bigamist, husband, poisoner and laudanum addict. Back in the day, I used to get changed for every video. Sometimes I would even wash my hair just because I was going to be recording that day. No longer like that. Indeed, you see in this hooded blanket a lot because when I'm lounging around the house, I tend to like to be comfortable. My dad commented on it the other day. He said to me, why are you dressed? You know, I don't wander around denuded, but what he meant was because usually I'm just gadding about in comfortable clothes, what he calls pyjamas. Like, they're not pyjamas. Still, the answer was because we had people here, and you can be unkempt around the people you live with and the people you know, but when it's the sister's boyfriend and the nephew, because the nephew comments on the fact that you're not in proper clothes, you gotta have some level of awareness about what you're wearing. But between you and me, this is who I am nowadays. I mean, it comes with the territory being a writer. When I was properly ingratiated in writing Alice Valentine, I could go days without showering. It was only that I woke up one day thinking, do you know what, it's been a while, that I thought, I mean, the most I've ever gone without a shower is probably 2 days. Let's not get on about my brother, he can go about 5 years. Anyway, I've reached book the third of Armadale by Wilkie Collins. I had hoped to just read more yesterday, and this isn't like last week. This is because it's a book that I think takes me about a page a minute. So by all intents and purposes, by all means, I read for 2.5 hours yesterday. And when I got back from my walk with Sally, it was around about 10 to 4. I put Tipping Point on for my dad, and then I set about peeling some apples for stewing because he got some and he'd been going on about it for a while, so I thought let's get them done. And today I'm hoping to turn some into a crumble and maybe work on an apple sponge. I'm not sure how it will work. Sometimes it can be like a pineapple upside down cake sort of scenario and you can rise to the top. Sometimes they say at the bottom like a level of jelly. I'll just have to figure out how it goes with all my timers and everything. Well, after that I was making tea. Then it got to time for watching Armadale, and you know it's stunt week, so I've got to be watching that. I mean, I'm pretty sure a certain person might have just carked it because she started talking about her hopes and dreams, but you know. So I didn't really sit down to read until 8:30. No, at 8:30. 8:30 was when I started my Italian practice. And then I was dipping in and out of it whilst my dad watched the show. So I properly had an hour with Classic FM on, sat in my corner when everyone had gone to bed and got some reading of this done. And I'm enjoying it. I think that... So, firstly, it is filled with dramatic things that I didn't expect from a Victorian novel. So you have two people called Alan Armadale, which is the result of two cousins who were competing against one another years before the events of this book, but we hear about them within the first book of the narrative. And then in the second book, we've moved quite a distance into the future and events are happening and a collision happens a collision of characters happens that you'd been led to believe should not occur. And it's always intriguing to read Wilkie Collins because you get to see what the attitudes were at the time surrounding certain things. So a doctor has looked at a man and decided he couldn't have indigestion because just from looking at the quality of his character, he could tell he could eat anything. And we got to see this person who flung herself from a first-class deck. And we've returned to a boat that we'd previously heard of in the first book. But one issue that I have found with the book is there is this tend towards some repetition that I think is a bit unnecessary. And I feel like I saw that in another of Wilkie Collins' books, but I can't remember what it was. I wonder whether the repetition within the text is to do with the time in which this book was released, because this book was released episodically, and so if people are going over a month without having read it, the author might wish to remind them of things that are going to be important to the narrative. So I can understand the reason it might be somewhat more repetitive. It's eerie to me how the character of Ozias Midwinter somehow reminds me of the Woman in White from The Woman in White, just in his behaviour and his manner. And similar to what I say about Anthony Trollope when I read him with the themes that he kept going back to, I wonder whether this is a certain type of character that Wilkie Collins connected with, or if Wilkie Collins had seen popularity from writing this type of character and was hoping to imitate that and recreate that here in Armadale. It is so far a book in which I can't sometimes figure out where it's going to go. Like, when Midwinter first appeared, I thought, well, the reader can very easily tell who you're going to be. But the reader doesn't really have any idea as to Midwinter's intentions, and it's very difficult to figure out where this book might go and the twists it might take, and I particularly like that. I think it also comes from the fact that this is another Victorian book that I don't really know much about, whereas with The Moonstone and The Woman in White, with those books, they are almost the ones that are very popular when you think about Wilkie Collins. They're the ones that everyone always talks about, so they're the ones that we really know more than any others. Whereas Armadale, until I first started hearing about it on Booktube, I knew nothing about it. Despite the fact that over the first 2 weeks of October, I've been spending Wednesday on a modern book, which for 2 Wednesdays in a row now has been Good Omens. This should really be finished by now, but I'll talk about this at a later date. I don't think I'm going to be reading book 3 today because the third book of this is quite long, and let's not even start talking about the fourth book. But maybe 70 to 80 pages today would be nice, as I am out this evening, again, third Wednesday in a row, for Joy's book launch of her book Borrowed Scenery, which is a book that is a celebration of Tatton Park, basically. She has been running workshops there for a few years, and this is a culmination of her work, but also a culmination of the work from those workshops. So some contributors have previously attended those workshops, but it is also a great celebration of nature and a different way of looking at the world, and it's intriguing, and almost there's some poems here that are somewhat fairy tale-esque in their execution, and I recommend it. And I'm not just saying that because I know the poet, although technically I am just saying that because I know the poet, because, you know, you wish your friends every success. Anyway, I'm off now. Hope your reading's going all right. My goodness, after I spoke to you yesterday, I took Sally down the canal and we had a tiny little bit of a disaster. In the clip that I shared, there are a lot of leaves that had been blown from the trees onto the canal. and Sally mistook them for the towpath, and I'd gone walking ahead because that's what we do now. I walk on, and once she's done all of her sniffing, she'll come to me, or she'll follow by me. You know, we're never too far away from each other. And I just turned around because I had this thought in my head. And as I turned around and shouted Sally no, she took a step, plummeted into the water. Have I had one of those moments where you're like, oh Lord, she's taking a while to come back up? In all, like, matter of fact, really, it was probably about 2 seconds she was under. And then she bobbed up and I grabbed her and deposited her back onto the towpath. And she shook herself off, and then she went herring off down the towpath, because that was it then. She was angry with the world. The world had upset her, and she did not know how to deal with those feelings. We had our usual walk to the bridge and back. For me, it was a walk. For her, it was this angry, angry session of just zoomies the entire way. Got back to the car, got her into the house and dried her off, and then she promptly came upstairs and started sulking, which is why the hooded blanket now needs washing, because she decided that she was going to sulk within the hooded blanket. It was a sad day for Sally, really, because having imbibed some canal water, she ended up vomiting, and my mother thought it was the chicken that she's been having, so she threw out this chicken, and Sally just looked at it with these doleful eyes as she watched the chicken get thrown away. She's got no treats left, and we didn't go shopping, so yesterday was not a good day to be Sally. She was very upset with the world. And today has been a bit of a busy day, so I have finished one of the modern books that I'm reading, Good Omens, No Relation to Great Expectations. But I haven't read much of Armadale yet. However, I'm hoping to rectify that within the next few hours, actually. Going to read some of that this evening. I had to wait in for a parcel, and the man who was coming to fix our washer was coming today as well, but we had no idea what time. It was one of those. He'll arrive sometime between 8 and 6. I will contact you 10 minutes before he's coming. My nephew is currently down from Scotland, as his school is on holiday a week earlier than the other ones, so he's been here as well, and it's just been a bit of a jam-packed last 4 hours, really. So I've missed the writers group today. It's been all around pretty busy, but I'm not feeling bad about things like I was last week when I didn't get much reading done, because I've decided not to. Even though it's been nearly 2 weeks since I finished reading a Victorian novel. I have been reading Victorian stuff, I just haven't finished any of it. But Armadale is still an incredibly fantastic, twisty, intriguing novel. I've spoken to Emily about it as we're buddy reading this, and she doesn't seem to be enjoying it as much as The Woman in White, but I didn't like The Woman in White. For me, as I said yesterday, I am noticing these parallels between The Woman in White and Collins' other works, but I guess he's going to write in a fashion that he knew was popular for his fans, so he's going to stick to that, and it makes sense. Again, I like not really knowing where this book is going to go or how everything's going to turn out, and I've also found an audiobook of this, and I'm hoping to start pairing the two together tomorrow. I keep waking up early and planning on listening to it whilst I'm in bed, but today I had to get up early because I didn't know what time the man was coming to fix the washer. And completely threw out all of Charlie's normal things that I was talking to you about yesterday, you know, just lazing about the house in a loungewear, really. I had to actually get dressed like a proper human being today. And then he didn't arrive until 2:20. Either way, like I say, didn't go to the writers group. And so gonna spend a few hours with Armadale, have my tea, and then I think it's drag race tonight. I'm sure it's Thursday, which means drag race. And I don't know what's happening tomorrow yet, but We'll see.
Oh, goodness gracious me, the hair. I tell you, it looked somewhat better before I started recording. We had a bit of a funicular issue last night. I have been using my wired headphones for a while, as I don't know what's going on with the wireless ones, and I have been trying to listen to at least 20 minutes of an audiobook every day for Victober, and I found the audiobook for Armadale, which is this full cast narration that's rather good. So I listened to me 2 chapters last night and switched my phone off. At least I thought I'd pressed pause on the audiobook. And what happened was I must have leant on that little bit of your headphone wire that causes whatever you're listening to last to come on, because I woke up this morning to find out that my phone had listened to 7 hours of Armadale. Meanwhile, I ain't that far into it. Actually had hoped to make more headway in this. I like it, and the letters that I've read between Lydia Gwilt and finally getting to meet her, my goodness. It's one of those things, like, they were talking about the fact that she's 35 and she's supposedly old and lost her beauty, and I was like, 35? There's no hope for me then, Chuck. But I suppose these were Victorian times and they had different ideas and ideals then. So my phone's way ahead of me, and there's some part of me that now it's at 7 hours for one day. I feel like now I need to leave it for a few days until it gets back to the point that I would have been at. But 7 hours is a lot of 20 minutes. So we're reading Armadale today and hoping to get through quite a big chunk. I had hoped to start one of my modern books today, The Historian by Elizabeth Costover, but I think that due to everything, all of the obligations I ended up with yesterday meant that I didn't get to read much of Armadale, so I'm going to focus on reading some of Armadale today until people come home and disturb me. I will say one thing that's particularly annoying me about it is Midwinter's melodrama. I understand why he is the way he is, but I'm just not too fond of it. What can you do? I've spoken to Emily about it, and we seem to be having opposing views as to who likes and who dislikes it. But I'm sure when we next converse, we might even have different opinions then. These things happen. It's Victorian.
One day, I imagine that I'm going to clean up the corner so that I can return to making my videos over there. Because I still need to record my best books of the third quarter of the year, and I don't know whether I'm recording a wrap-up for September yet. I might, we'll see. I read 200 pages of Armadale yesterday. Not as many pages as I wanted to, because I did want to catch up with the audiobook. I don't know whether Emily is having the same frustrations as I am, and we'll have to speak to her about this, but I'm finding that we are now 400 pages into the book, and since about page 100, not a lot has happened by way of action. It's been a lot of foreshadowing and then reported action. We're not getting to see any of the drama that has taken place. I mean, I understand that this is a Victorian novel and I'm bringing my modern reading sensibilities to this. And I know that this happened in The Law and the Lady as well. But in The Law and the Lady, there was also a gripping plot there. Because of the way this book operates, we haven't actually learned of this plot that's supposed to grip us. So at the moment, we're at the 400 page mark, and we know that this Lydia Gwilt is supposed to be a villain. It says on the back that she's a villain. When we first met her, we knew that she had villainous intentions, but everything that has been said through letters and has been reported. And there's not a lot of action going on. And with only 270 pages left of the book, I wonder whether it's ever going to pick up. It feels incredibly bloated at the moment, and unnecessarily so. I don't know why it's such a hefty tome anymore. I'll admit that when Alan Armadale was first courting Miss Milroy, I found that somewhat humorous, and it reminded me occasionally of the early forms of courtship that we got to see in film, where there was a bit of humour there, and there was the accidental offence taken, and especially when Miss Milroy thought that Armadale was thinking about her, only to find out he was thinking about Midwinter, and the offence she took in the way that she dealt with that situation. And I like those bits of comedy, but that's not something that has ran throughout. And indeed, I would say that the last hundreds or so pages have been the most boring for me. It was when I finished the third book and I was sat here like, well, that was great, but what did it add to the narrative? And then this little bit of a time jump happened, and then we go to the Mrs. Milroy, Miss Milroy's mother, and she begins the machinations to remove Lydia Gwilt from her situation. And then this takes another turn, and this could be a really nice dark twist on the tale, but what happens again is reported to us through the form of a letter. We don't get to see it happen. Indeed, again, we only got to hear what the people of the time were thinking in a paragraph 50 pages after we've been told that people weren't looking at somebody favourably. If I don't finish this book today, I'm definitely hoping to finish it by tomorrow. And I'm still hopeful that it's going to improve, because I was very much enjoying the first 200 pages of this book when it was taking twists and turns and was somewhat murderous and felt very deadly. And it's only since it calmed down that I have begun to feel somewhat differently towards it. I am also hoping to read one of the short stories from Dickens' Ghost Stories today. So I've decided that I'm hoping to finish all of these before the end of the month. I'm not reading A Christmas Carol out of this collection. I've read it plenty of times before, and I always read that in December, so I'm not reading it now. And I'm also developed the habit of reading a Christina Rossetti poem before I go to bed each day. So hopefully I'll have this finished by the end of the week. I'll be finishing the ghost stories by the end of the week, and I've been listening to at least 20 minutes of Great Expectations as well. So I only have a few hours left of that too. It's one of those things when I look at my reading journal and I'm like, I'm not achieving anything because I haven't got anything written in here. And then I think about it and I'm like, I'm actually reading a lot of books. I'm just reading them all at the same time, so none of them are finished and they don't go on in here until they're finished. Because when I first started creating a reading journal in 2011, I was putting the date that I started reading and the date that I finished reading, and sometimes I didn't finish reading the book, so they'd just be there left with a mark next to the name. So now they only go in the journal when they're finished being read. And admittedly, sometimes I forget that I've read them. Admittedly, that does happen. We're currently 103 books into the year. Maybe I would have liked to have read more. I don't know. I'd also read 103 books by this point last year as well, so I've caught up with myself. I was ahead earlier this year. That shows how much my reading has slowed down throughout the year, that I was so far ahead at the start of the year, and now we've had the dramatic come down. But hey, these things happen. I'm the one who chose to read books over 600 pages. I'm not just here throwing in the odd graphic novel, although we do have a graphic novel to read. Why couldn't the Victorians write some more picture books? I'd be flying through Victober then.
It hasn't been long since I last spoke to you. I've read one more chapter. And this friendship between Midwinter and Alan seems to have come to a head as Midwinter uncharacteristically decides to side with somebody over Alan. And my goodness, Sally's trying to take the limelight here. My goodness, it seems to have come out of nowhere just to service the plot. And I need some change to happen rather quickly. I need something plot-wise to happen. I need us to speed along a bit now. There's 270 pages left, and I need Wilkie Collins to get to the point, because my goodness, I'm getting frustrated. I seem to be pressing record a lot today. I just read the first story from Best Ghost Stories by Charles Dickens. Just to say that I'd completed something this week. And it turns out I've already read it. Now, admittedly, it has been 8 years since I read the Pickwick Papers, but I recognise the name of Tom Smart. The first 2 stories in here, if not the first 3, are from the Pickwick Papers, and the 4th is from Nicholas Nickleby. I think I am going to get them read, because they will count as ghost stories, because we all know that Dickens did this. He included shorter pieces of fiction within his novels. It has been a while since I read them. I read Nicholas Nickleby from 2010 till 2011. Or 11 to 12. It doesn't matter when I watched. It doesn't matter when I read Nicholas Nickleby. I read Nicholas Nickleby over a year, and it's definitely been over a decade since I read that, so I won't mind returning to a short piece from that novel. But I had hoped to be reading pieces that I haven't seen before, although like I say, it definitely proves something that I had forgotten about these stories. It was just the recognition of the name, and then when I got to the end of it, I was like, that's why it's from Nickleby. No, that's why it's from the Pickwick Papers. The next story in here is incredibly short as well. It's a piece of dialogue from chapter 11 of the Pickwick Papers. Then we go to chapter 29 of the Pickwick Papers, and again, recognise the name of Gabriel Grubb. It's a story entitled The Queer Chair, in which a man goes to stay at an inn where he gets drunk, and he sees this widow and this man in a top hat at the bar on the night that he arrives. And during the night, he ends up having a vision of this chair that is in the room transforming into a man, and this chair makes a request of him. It's decidedly humorous to me simply because of the way in which the chair talks about his lost siblings and the way it seems like a hearkening to A Christmas Carol, although that's many years later, I know. So technically A Christmas Carol is probably hearkening back to the queer chair. Also the way that in A Christmas Carol, Dickens tries to tell Marley when he sees his ghost that he is there is more gravy than a grave about you, and wonders whether it is something that he ate that is causing him to see this spirit. And here, clearly, is it the alcohol that the man has consumed, or is he actually witnessing the transformation of a chair into a human imbued with some sort of spirit and a connection to this widow? And it's definitely humorous, surreal, and completely absurd. But honestly, that's a lot of the Pickwick Papers. The Pickwick Papers is this conglomeration of just tons of stories, piecemeal stories that jigsawed together to create this entire narrative. And I would say that in terms of that novel, it's very much, I've said it before about Dickens being like a soap opera, and I say in that one it's very much like that. It's very episodic, almost like what nowadays I imagine you would see serialized in The People's Friend or one of those magazines, where they'll give you the weekly serial, and over however many weeks it will run on. Although I do know that now they have regular tales, including their own soap opera. I might read the next story in here, as it is only about 5 pages. Before we return to Armadale. This might be the white whale of Victober 2022.
I finished reading Armadale by Wilkie Collins last night, and I have some thoughts. This book begins incredibly well. It is fast-paced and full of intrigue over this dying man arriving in the spa town of Wilde and revealing this confession on his deathbed. And that confession ends up as a shadow over the second part of the narrative, which takes place 21 years later back in England and follows the heirs of the characters who are mentioned in this confession. I was reminded of Alfred Hitchcock at first with the characters of Alan Armadale and Midwinter and how they would revolve around one another. Then it felt like the author couldn't really figure out what sort of plot he wanted this book to have. Midwinter is incredibly worried because he has read this deathbed confession and feels as though it is some sort of prophecy over how his life must go. And you know he's not had the best of childhoods since this confession happened. On the back of my edition, it talks about Lydia Gwilt, and her introduction doesn't actually happen for quite a while in the scheme of this novel. And her appearance isn't really foreshadowed, you just get an idea as to you find out who she was in relation to the original story towards the end of the book. So it does have some sort of full circle moment towards the end of the book. But for me, I ended up empathizing with the villain more than I did the protagonist, because I couldn't really see what she was doing as villainy. I mean, technically, it is villainy. Technically, this is a classic revenge story, but it's one of those revenge stories where I ended up rooting for the person who wanted the revenge, and I ended up wanting Lydia Gwilt to succeed, which wasn't the point of this novel. A huge issue that I had with the book is that it is 679 pages long, and there is no need for this book to be so long. It felt incredibly bloated, and it was all reported. Now, sometimes an epistolary novel can do this incredibly well. I mean, I really like The Moonstone, and I really liked Five Little Pigs by Agatha Christie. Both books do this thing where the story is told in diary entries and letters, and this isn't an epistolary novel, but it does have diary entries and letters to bulk out the narrative and tell you about what's happened. But that's where my issue is, because had this action actually taken place on the page, as opposed to us being told it had happened or it was going to happen, then I would have felt differently about it. Another issue that I had with it is towards the end, Gwilt is coming up with her final bit of revenge. She knows what she's going to do now, and yet she's been told what she must do, and then we get to see her do it, and it just felt incredibly repetitive. It's not even a book of two halves for me, I don't think. It's a book where the first 150 pages had me really intrigued and really loving the sensation and the twist this book was taking. And I have to say, I didn't expect the book to end where it did end, but I couldn't really see the book ending in any other fashion than the way it ended, because this entire novel felt like every single event was a prophecy for something. I'm not really one for dreams in fiction. I know that there's a place for dreams in fiction, and when I say my issue sometimes with dreams in fiction is sometimes they are used to create intrigue and create action when it's unnecessary. So I'd say the worst case of a dream sequence I read was when somebody began their novel with something and you didn't know it was a dream sequence, and it was incredibly thrilling and murderous and full of action and was incredibly thrilling, only for the character to wake up and find out everything was a dream. And I didn't like that. But I do believe that sometimes dreams have a place in fiction. Sometimes you could learn more about a character's innermost thoughts from that. You can also use it as Armadale, as Collins has done in Armadale, to emphasise the way a certain man's mind works and his belief in dreams, and show the perhaps opposing dreams. This does in the beginning actually go quite heavily into dreams. But I don't really know what the point of it was in this novel. At first I thought it was a good way to show what Midwinter's state of mind was, but I didn't really understand why it was such a big deal overall, because we kept going back to it, but it never really seemed to go anywhere. I didn't like the way that the story was told, but I could understand why this was shocking for the Victorian era, with the way that Gwilt's character behaves and the things that she does, and how she doesn't necessarily behave like the respectable Victorian woman. You can see that Collins was definitely getting fed up with his detractors towards the end of this book because of what he starts saying about novelists. And let me see if I can find it for you. A doctor at a sanatorium is talking about the novels that he keeps for his patients to read. And when somebody questions whether they be reading amusing novels, the doctor says this: "Only such novels as I have selected and perused myself in the first instance. Nothing painful, ma'am. There may be plenty that is painful in real life, but for that very reason we don't want it in books. The English novelist who enters my house, no foreign novelist will be admitted, must understand his art as the healthy-minded English reader understands it in our time. He must know that our purer modern taste, our higher modern morality, limits him to doing exactly two things for us when he writes a book. All we want of him is, occasionally to make us laugh, and invariably to make us comfortable." And when I read that, I thought, yep, Collins was getting fed up with his detractors here. And I have to say, for the most part, I must have found something within the book to continue reading. But I did finish reading The Woman in White when I read that last year. I wouldn't say that I dislike this as much as I dislike The Woman in White, but it still hasn't reached those heights as the Moonstone or the Law and the Lady for me. It's, once again, I would say this is a miss in terms of Wilkie Collins. I think that if you're a reader of Victorian fiction and you want to read something that was decidedly shocking for the time, then Armadale would be a good place to go because of the content that is within here and the way that characters behave. Lydia Gwilt is an incredibly interesting character to me, and I think that the aspect of Armadale is what ruined the novel for me, really. I think that a revenge story focusing entirely on Lydia Gwilt and giving us more of an idea as to how she came to be the person she is would be much more in keeping for the sort of thing that I like, because really, if you're showing a woman that's been screwed over by society, then I'm all for her getting a revenge and taking somebody for everything they're worth. So I ended up on the side of the villain in this one. So nowadays, we ain't just looking for justice for Mary Thorne, we're looking for justice for Lydia Gwilt as well. Because she was hard done by, I don't care what anyone says. She ain't a villain in my book. And quite honestly, I might have been a person who would have helped her back in the day. But then, to be fair, she was able to manipulate men. But to be fair, the men that Collins writes about are all drips of people anyway. Alan Armadale, drip. Ozias Midwinter, drip. That other drip who turned up. Ugh. Do you know what? Lydia Gwilt should have teamed up with Miss Milbury and we would have had a fantastic time. They could have just gone through Victorian England as gold diggers and I'd have been happy. I'd have been fine. Anyway, that is only the second book that I have finished for Victober, and this is the final week we're entering into here. Great Expectations. So, this week I will be finishing Great Expectations, but as I've said, I'm probably going through this slowly because I'm only listening to the audiobook every day, as I have read this before. I am also continuing with Dickens' best ghost stories. This week I'll be actually getting to some ghost stories that I haven't read before, and I'm looking forward to that. Goblin Market and other poems, I'll be finishing this week as well. So, them's 3 books. And 2 that I'll be going to this week are Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands by Mary Seacole. I had to read that because it was a tongue twister. And finally, The Picture of Dorian Gray. We gotta get this one done. If nothing else, we have to get this one done. Well, today I am off work still. This should be my final day of holiday, but I won't be back until Friday. And I have to go to a library this afternoon where I'm doing my first event for Royal E. Doris. So I've got that planned. Hopefully it goes well, because I think before every event, I get used to some nerves. Then I get there and I see the people I've seen before and I'm like, do you know what? We're okay. But before that, I have to go through this entire process of nerves, caffeine, and worry about where I'll park. But we'll see. Anyway, how's your reading been going this week? Have you found any new favourites? If so, do let me know what they are. Have you read Armadale before? Do your opinions differ from mine, or do we have some similar opinions? Do let me know as well. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all. I will also say, I will try and look less unkempt going forward. I will. It's just, I feel like we're close to one another now, so I don't have to try so hard. I'm sorry.